Today's session, I want to talk about adaptability.
That's a article they did on us my first year. I looked
I
12
talked
years
about the
old.
sophomore class, and I think one of the forgotten parts of that team was our juniors. And one thing I remember was that CJ Bowker was by far the best player on our team that year. He hit like probably 700 at the plate. John Body was probably the reason I was able to pitch. You know, like he was the best, one of the best besides you, maybe one of the best coaches I ever had.
A lot of it has to do with having your behavior as a coach mirror your words.
Teacher decided
That's
that I'm comfortable making decisions that go against the status quo, but it's taken me a long time to get there.
It's among my, if not my favorite year of coaching, it's among my favorite year because to have gone 1-8.
I was thinking about this decentralized command term that Wes had told me about this podcast. Nice guy.
And then I always have one nickel that I actually bend with a pliers. Though I can do it if I really.
So like the psychological concepts that you're thinking about emphasizing in your players through the course of the season.
Where teenage boys are talking to each other, using the word love to engage with other teenage boys that they probably wouldn't use that word pretty openly.
Metaphors we live by, like growth mindset or web of beliefs, lion's den, belly of the beast is a good one that has a catchy title.
But I think for me, the biggest adaptation is using technology as an advantage and not a burden.
Finish on, which is how did your softball coaching experience inform your baseball coaching experience ever since then? But
it's my upbringing taught me to speak to you more respectfully. So I think I have a more respectful tone with my guys teams now. So I guess that was a change.
So today's session, I want to talk about adaptability, how we adapt as teachers, how you adapt as a coach, how being adaptable is kind of part of mindset. I was thinking about introducing it with a memory. I think last time I started off on a memory of my senior season, and I found this this thing that Mrs. Sullivan put together for our senior team. You probably can't see it, but she spent time putting together this collection of all the articles from all our stories. It's got pictures, it's got quotes. It's now 24 years later. It says teamwork is the ability to work together toward a common union, the ability to direct individual accomplishment towards organizational objectives. It is the fuel that allows common people to attain uncommon results. That was powerful to me. I also kind of thought, like, this is self-serving, because if we get Miss Sullivan on board with this, she could probably do all our marketing for us. But I looked at, can I show a picture of you as a youngin? That's you.
That's the article. That's the article. I think I mentioned it in our third thing. That's a article they did on us my first year. I looked 12 years old.
You do. I was thinking back to how you were adaptable in that season, and how one thing you did was unconventional. Was you went into this? We had several pitchers, and you tried this thing where you would pitch us all for one inning, and then sort of towards the end of the year, we moved to like 4 pitchers and then one person to pitch the last 3, I think, and I often got that last person role, and I assume that confidence you showed in me affected my mentality as a hitter. But I was also thinking about how that year was a moment of bonding that me, Sully, Wes, and Tooch still hold. Like, we're still all close. We had that experience. I talked about the sophomore class, and I think one of the forgotten parts of that team was our juniors. And one thing I remember was that CJ Bowker was by far the best player on our team that year. He hit like probably 700 at the plate. John Body was probably the reason I was able to pitch. You know, like he was the best, one of the best, besides you, maybe one of the best coaches I ever had. And I'm looking back at how that season started, and we lost our first game to Midway 8-5. We lost our second game to Westwood 19-3. We lost our third game to Ashland, and this is a baseball score, not a football score, 17-6. And then that Dover Sherborne game, we won 22-15. And then, you know, it wasn't like all rosy after that, but I think beating a team that we were supposed to beat, scoring 22 runs at some point, we turned into a playoff team. And I just want you to ask you about like how much of coaching goes into adapting as the season goes on.
Oh, a huge percentage. Yeah. So and it's a lot of it has to do with having your behavior as a coach mirror your words. That's in the class as well, but in coaching, really important that what you say and what you do are match. That's something, and again, I say this all the time, that I'm like embarrassed about a lot of the things that I taught you guys or how I did it then, because I didn't know what I know now. So I'm much better at doing that now. Matching what I'm saying to you guys with my own behavior. So I tell the kids, if you get caught up in the results of the first 2 or 3 games, if you get caught up in the results at all, you're never going to have the opportunity to experience those joys at the end, because it really is about the process. So you have to stay consistent with, okay, did we do the things that we could control well? And if we did that, we should get on the bus and have not a joyful ride home when you get pummeled and you're out there for 3 hours in the cold, but you should be content and figure out what you need to work on. And what I mean by controlling the things we can control, we can't control our overall talent. We can't control how good the other team is. We can't control the umpires or weather or bad bounces, but we can control how hard we were and how focused and attentive we were. And that's something I've grown to assess. So you have to, and then be able to adjust the adaptability part, adjust to your strengths and weaknesses. So beyond that, I don't know what year it was, but I had one year where I threw 7 kids every game. Unless we never got a chance on the road to throw the 7th inning because we were losing. So our motto became, please lose on the road. So we would save an inning of pitching. So that was adapted to our sort of to our talent, where I had 7 kids, no superstars, but 7 kids who would want to compete. And we threw 7 kids every single game. And went from being 1-9 to making the tournament at 10-10.
And what year was that? Or around what point in your career are we talking?
Around 2000. It might have been 2000.
Okay.
They gave me a little thing that I still keep on my desk. A little ball statue trophy type thing, and it said the 1-8 greats. It's among my, if not my favorite year of coaching, it's among my favorite year, because to have gone 1-8 and then the second time through to have gone 8-1 against the exact same teams is pretty remarkable. it wasn't as though we played the difficult part of our schedule early. We played the exact 9 teams and went 8-1 against the same teams that we went 1-8. That's adaptability. The kids, they bought in. We changed our pitching thing, and you know, we had a motto that until we lose the 10th game, we're still have an opportunity to make the tournament. And they never lost that 10th game, you know. So it was great. It was really exciting.
This is another. This is that's cool. Hopefully somebody can like ping them or at them or whatever, so that they get to watch you tell that story. I was thinking about, like, as a teacher, I have 3 different classes. One of the classes is a geometry class where I don't think, you know, these are students that have different needs than the system prioritizes, I think. And I've, as a teacher, decided that I'm comfortable making decisions that go against the status quo, but it's taken me a long time to get there. And I guess I wonder, like, that's an unconventional decision, what you did with those pitchers, right? Like, did you sort of go through a process where you were practicing making unconventional decisions and it got to a point in your head where you're were actually kind of doing that to test them?
Well, it's easier to make unconventional decisions when you're failing, right? So what we were doing wasn't working in terms of wins and losses. And when it doesn't work in terms of wins and losses, even though that's not your priority, it can sap your energy and your enthusiasm and make it hard. I mean, you also don't want kids to be embarrassed by their performance. So, and beyond that, the thing that I really like about it is I've always been fond of kind of the link in the chain mentality, that you're 1/9 of the any given time on the field and you got to do your role. That was really a way to make an individual sport really a team sport, where they started thinking about the whole and their role in the whole, and it was a tangible role. And then when one of the links was not sturdy that day, the next few could still bail him out, and the next day it would inevitably be a different person. But it was exciting because it gave us a lot to talk about. It was something to, as it started to work, it really gave them a living, actual example of teamwork and your role in the process. And it was great. And every single kid on the team played every single game. It was the ultimate year, because in order to switch pitchers out, you have to incorporate your bench. You can't legally do it without incorporating the bench. So it was exciting in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. So do you think about it as like one long chain with a bunch of links, where if one breaks, the chain is broken, or more like a web of links that are kind of all connected together?
I don't know. I never really thought about the link.
I was thinking about this decentralized command term that Wes had told me about, this podcast, this guy Jocko, who talks about decentralized command. And it's interesting. And the idea is, I think what you speak to is kind of like, you don't want, you want you and your players to have the same common end goal. Like, you don't need to be telling them every piece of information as the game is changing. You want them to be able to interpret and react based on what you guys have outlined and decided prior to the game, right?
Yeah. So, I use the link in the chain being that you're, the just kind of imagery that you're only as strong as your weakest link, right? So, but the image that I actually use in the classroom, which I don't know if I did it when you were there or not, but I always had, and I really like it. I guess I like a lot of hokey stuff, but I like this one because I like things that they can kind of see and you can talk through it. if we had 16 guys on the team, I would have 16 nickels. And have I showed you that?
Uh-uh.
So, and we stack the 16 nickels. And then I always have one nickel that I actually bend with a, with a pliers. Though I can do it if I really, so I bend with a pliers and I take one of the nickels out, and it's a great image because wherever you put that nickel, it destroys everything beyond it. So if I put it on the top, the nickel being the kid who gets quote unquote bent out of shape, if I put it on the top, we can carry you, right? We can carry you. But if I put you anywhere else in that thing, everything at least above you will topple. So the impact that your attitude and your behavior has, right? You can't be on the bottom. You certainly can't carry us. You can't be somebody that we rely upon. And how many people, wherever I put you in that thing, how many are you gonna take along in a negative direction? So, and it has nothing to do with skills. It has nothing to do with, it's your attitude. It's what you bring to the team. And that's a lot easier to convey when every single kid is physically contributing as well,
And is it like is it a message to the team too, that when one kid is bent, like it's on you to straighten him out a little bit? Like,
yeah. I mean, that was not in the old school sort of way. So that would actually be a directive when I was growing up. Take care of that problem, and that had some implicit message.
yeah, I'm gonna walk this way. Will you take care of that problem?
Exactly. But that's why I guess that's what I'm most proud of in our program is the leadership, the kids modeling for other kids. Our school does a good job of that too. They do a lot of leadership training, captains training, things like that, which, it's always like everything else. It's as good as the presenters, but I think the kids, in our school and definitely in our program, value being captains. Like it comes with responsibility, rather than just a resume builder. So, and I think that's important. It's easier for kids to lead than coaches to lead.
So let's get into the things that prevent adaptation, I think. And I think there's this term in math called fractals. Everybody likes to talk about fractals and this idea that self-similarity or scale independence. Like I think you can see some of these same things that we talk about in individuals in our systems or in our teams, but like confirmation bias.
You're gonna have to translate fractals.
Well, let's see where we get to. Confirmation bias, right? Confirmation bias is a thing that we talk about individuals having. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Is that something like you talk about as a teacher or as a coach, or?
Not as a coach, I don't think. I don't know that I talk about it as a coach. Directly, I certainly don't talk about it as a coach. I talk about it a lot as a teacher because of my subject with the kids, because I think confirmation bias is more prevalent in politics than it is in anything else in the world. I think our world is a living, breathing example of it, right? We even you and I, we've talked about it. I have a set of beliefs, about whatever it happens to be, about race or social justice or any kind of issues. I have a set of beliefs, and confirmation bias, drop my pen, tells me that I'm seeking out information confirming that belief. And, I try as best I can to tell the kids that they should be open up to varying viewpoints. And telling them is not much. I do have them periodically go on a particular website that has bipartisan articles, because they have articles from every publication in the country every day. So I tell them to read a headline and read an article where the headline makes you uncomfortable. So at the very least, to do that, where it makes you uncomfortable, and to try to, I call it engaging the enemy. It's probably not a good way to phrase it, but to engage the enemy. I'm not good at it at all, but I recognize that I'm not good at it.
And I noticed that I can actually, I have a short attention span, and I start listening to stuff where they're talking about things that I've heard before or opinions that I already kind of hold. My mind wanders. But now I've started listening to things that, and these are podcasts. They're like long form things where I can understand the opposition's ideas and where their belief system. That holds my attention a lot longer. They still don't change my mind, but so if not confirmation bias, maybe that goes to a point that sometimes sports don't let you, sports force you to confront things that schools or politics often don't. What are the psychology things that you talk, like the psychological concepts that you're thinking about emphasizing in your players through the course of the season?
I think if we're comparing it to class with the advantage of sport, there's certain things about coaching that are a lot easier than teaching, meaning that you mentioned maybe in your email about putting group over self. That's hard in the classroom. There's not, you can do certain things within the class, group projects or group discussions or, whatever. I don't know how you would do it in your discipline, but I could do it in mine. They can analyze something together and feed off each other. I just did a group test where they were able to work on it, and that's good, except I don't even think they care. They're not trying to promote the group. They're trying to use the group to benefit themselves in that regard, right? And maybe it shows that cooperation is a good way to do that. Each individual benefits from cooperation. But in sports, it's different. I mean, they really do. You really can develop an identity of group pride, and you do benefit individually, and you benefit collectively, and it's so the group dynamic is one psychology that we're always talking about. I try not to ever have like slogans or t-shirts that are going to be just slogans or t-shirts. We have to try to find a way where we could self-assess whether or not we're actually bringing the slogan to life. Are we actually doing it? And putting themselves on the line for the group, putting themselves in uncomfortable positions. We do that quite a bit in the classroom, where teenage boys are talking to each other, using the word love to engage with other teenage boys that they probably wouldn't use that word pretty openly. So that's exciting from a non-athletic point of view about the team. The other psychological methodology that I use is we try to approach everything in the affirmative. We try to only talk about what we're doing, not about what we hope won't happen. We try to eliminate I mean, it sounds cliche to eliminate the word can't, but we try to eliminate phraseology like in the back of my mind, or I hope, or if he, qualifying statements. We try to make everything affirmative. When he does this, this is how I'm going to react, from a hitting standpoint, or when this happens, this is what's going to happen. I am going to drive that that ball, and think of everything from an affirmative action. So that's exciting too, where we respectfully call each other out when that's not the norm. So.
That's interesting. Yeah, I'm reading a book that is called Metaphors We Live By. It's from 1980, and like it's really deep, and it's all about that kind of like the metaphors we use and the phrasing we use as a window into our kind of like subconscious mind. But I was thinking how if you or anyone you know is writing a book, pick a more flashy title than Metaphors We Live By, like Growth Mindset or Web of Beliefs, Lion's Den, Belly of the Beast is a good one that has a catchy title. The question I was going to ask you is about groups, because unless I heard on a podcast the other day, like in the individual, derangement or delusion or lunacy, I can't remember the word they used, but is rare, but in groups it's common, right? And I see that as a teacher in like when we have the term echo chambers, we talk about all that all the time. And I feel like a lot of times these days, no matter what group I'm in, I feel like I'm in an echo chamber, and I think we're missing out on some group accountability structures that hold us like to a productive discussion. Is there anything you do at your team to do that, or is that not an issue? Or
well, I was off in a different direction on groups.
Well, you can take it in any direction you want.
Yeah, I don't know how that. I have to think about how it applies to the team. But when you were talking about lunacy and things applying more to groups than individual people, yeah, I think that's, again, I bring everything back to either sports or politics, and that's the more we identify people as their group, the more dangerous it is for society. So I don't know if that's what you meant by it, but when I think of the dangers of the group mentality, I think that, right? I think of when our group identity becomes more significant than our individual identity, we're in a place where we actually are in our country right now. That becomes scary, because when we're trying to protect, I've always thought of it this way, we're trying to protect minority equity, minority rights, minority access. The greatest minority is the individual, right? The greatest minority by definition is one person, and we should be protecting our individual identities way more than we do. Instead of intersectionalizing as we do, and painting you and me, who are vastly different people, but we fit a lot of the same groups. So I think group identity is dangerous, which makes everything I said about the power of the group in sports sound really inconsistent. But
well, yeah. I mean, I think we've done a long time drawing this forward. To me, this goes back to me talking about my experience in Oakland, and you talking about your experience growing up, and our common experience as outsider, like feeling like as outsiders, or others. And I think what you're talking about, there's a lot of truth to it, and I think we have to identify who the insiders are, and who the people that benefit a lot of times from the power structures when we have that conversation. But what you said about intersectionality, it made me think of like if you take a sphere, right, and you cut it into one thin little cross section, you have like a disc, like a CD or something. And that's kind of the metaphor I think of when we talk. We use the word diversity all the time, and diversity to me is a word that has meaning if you talk about it as a sphere, but a lot of times we lose track of the fact that we're only talking about the disc. So I often talk about intergenerational diversity now as a way to kind of to bring that up, or to make that point across. And I wanted to ask you this question about growing up in an Italian, Portuguese family. Was intergenerational living more normal in your family or in that culture and than it is in the community you live in now? And can you speak to any of the differences in mentality or culture that results in?
Not exactly sure what you mean about the intergenerational. So explain that a little, what you mean by it. I don't want, I have a feeling I'm
Yeah,
going to answer something that you don't mean.
well, I think that in Hopkinton, you tend to have an elder group, a middle-aged group, and a kid group. And I would say the middle-aged group tends to be sort of in power. I mean, for lack of a better word, and the elders don't live with the middle-aged group. And even with the parents and kids, there's as compared to communities that I've gotten to know in Oakland, Latino, Black, and Pacific Islander communities, like there's more gatherings where you have all the generations together and they're kind of like a big party with everybody having fun. I don't see that as much in, I guess, suburban culture, I would say.
Yeah, okay. That's what I thought you meant, but I don't see it as much as, um, as, lost my train of thought. I don't see it as much as urban versus suburban or as I do, the passage of time, the current world we live in, where it was intergenerational because your family, definitely where I grew up, family was the most present in your life, right? It was much more uncommon for people to move away from the community. It was much more uncommon for kids to even go too far away from home for college. You also had no, I don't want to say that I lived in horse and buggy times, but it almost sounds strange now, but if you talk to your parents, we had no cell phones, there were no computers, there was no cable television, there was no internet, right? Obviously, right? So you were who you were with, physically with. And there wasn't as much travel. People did not move away from home in pursuit of a job in California nearly as much. So your family was everything, and it was generationally, values in the family were generationally passed down. So I don't know. There definitely wasn't that middle group ruling it. It was the elders, right? Kids were seen and not heard to a certain extent, and we were taught to, though I didn't need to be taught it, but we revered our grandparents, which is something that I'm constantly asking my kids now. How many of them talk to their grandparents at least weekly? And it is an extraordinarily low number. And when I'm talking about talking to them, when I reduce it to talking to them in person, it's extremely low, which is astonishing to me. I saw my grandmother and my uncles and aunts daily in person. So it was the structure of the family was incredibly important. So I don't know that it's the urban nature of those other groups you mentioned, or the familial structure.
Yeah, I think um, there's probably I have no idea to what degree it is either, but what you said kind of made me think of that. Like, it is partly a result of social media, I think, too. And what I think is the, if I was talking to myself as a kid, I would say, like, you're talking to your grandparent to learn about their lives, but you're also learning it to get comfortable talking to somebody from another generation. I think we lose sight of this, like that. A lot of, like, what you and I have in these conversations reached a more comfortable point right now in conversation 4, I think, because of what we've done prior to it. And I think that's that's one of the psychological things that I'm thinking of as a teacher, is that, like, to emphasize the fact that experiential learning, like, I guess it brings up the fixed versus the growth mindset. Like, I think we oftentimes look at exactly what we're supposed to learn as our content, and that distracts us from the whole, like, learning to be learners, learning to be curious, learning to be engaged in what you're doing part.
Yeah. Back it up a little to the thing. It's common. Like, I'm supposed to say that it's not this new generation or this new type of culture we have vis-a-vis the one I grew up in is not better or worse. It's just different. I'm supposed to say that. I don't believe it, though, so I have to lie to say that. I just think it's worse. I don't see any benefit in seeing your family less. I don't see any benefit in your community not being tight knit. I don't see benefit in me, embarrassingly, as I'm looking out my window at 4 different houses, knowing the names of the people that live in only 2 of them. When I grew up, I could walk in any of those homes without knocking. So I think this communication and the social media and the technology drawing us apart, it's made the world smaller, and it has tremendous advantages, but I see a net loss of, I think you as a teacher have as much or more impact on some of your students than their families. You see them more, you talk to them more. I mean, you're a nice person, but that scares me, that we have that. There's certain things that I wish my kids would get from home, and I would not have influence on them in those areas outside of my discipline and just, modeling being a good person or whatever. But I don't want my kids, my own children, I mean, they're out of high school now, but I don't want them being raised by their teachers.
But you're able to say that I'm supposed to say this and I don't believe this. And I feel like that puts you in a different point than where most people are at. And I think most people, well, I shouldn't say most people, but I think a lot, like, to me, I'm trying to see a light at the end of the tunnel. And I think Zoom is sort of like, they've got a lot of things that have driven people apart through social media and technology. But I see a possibility that things like Zoom and Discord and Slack are ways of bringing us back together in ways that opportunities that we didn't have before. This, between you and me, an example, things that, like this whole year, I've gotten to know my family better. And so I think that's kind of cool. But I think what you touched on is how, if, like, it sort of goes with the passage of time, right? Like, kids these days, the music they listen to, all this kind of thing, like, these are not new things. But I think when you're able to know what you're supposed to say and also know how you feel, then you can connect with the kids in a way that I'm not sure everybody who's of the same, kind of frustrated with the change connect to them. And to me, that is one of the things I try to explain to my students to help them understand the world that we're living in today.
Yeah. And it's the same in sports. Every generation. So, and I just had this conversation with my younger son when I said to him, I hate professional sports now. It was way better when I was younger. And he says, well, you just see it that way because that's what you're used to, and that's all it's done. And I said, yeah, I do, and I'm correct. It's like there's just certain things that I just do not like about where we've gone with sports. In the same way, there's certain things I don't like, but I understand we have to be adaptable and help, like you said, help the kids be. I don't want to beat them down about their job. I often say to my kids, I think we could agree that you've ruined my country. They just give me one of these, but I present it as though I'm kidding.
Yeah, well, I do the same. Like sometimes I use jokes to get into these things. Like I'll say I see what I want to see, believe what I want to believe, so that we can talk about confirmation bias later. Like I think I do the same kind of thing. I mentioned the growth mindset before, which I feel like is one of these good book titles because you don't have to read it. You can know the growth mindset, Carol Dweck, and you can bro around citing it, talking about it. And it's one of those things like mental health, where a lot of times the fact that we're talking about it so much sheds a window into the fact that we're better at talking about it than modeling it. Like to me, that adaptability part connects back to the idea of the growth mindset. And to talk about the growth mindset, we have to recognize that the norm is actually, I think, a fixed mindset. And I think sometimes schools reinforce that. Like I think, I know for me, I still remember my SAT score, right? And I'm not saying that SATs are bad or anything, but I think what we don't as educators do often is connect these dots that like your learning is a lifelong process, that there is no single number that describes what your intelligence is.
Yeah, I think we touched on it a little indirectly last week, where if you eliminate grading and assessment tomorrow, education will improve tremendously. I think, because if you take that off the table and they're learning for learning's sake, and I can take them in a direction of interest to the group, and I can not worry about content and not worry about how I'm going to assess it. Like I recall now what we were talking about. I wanted to introduce that kind of a talk radio class where we do pro and con and discuss. And when the very first time that I proposed it, the question was, how are you going to assess the kids? Like, how are you going to give them a grade? And I don't teach that course because I didn't have an answer. I didn't know. I gave some sarcastic answer that I would just give them one.
Yeah.
And that wasn't sufficient. But we operate within a system that it's hard to escape it because they want to go to college. And until the colleges change their criteria, which some have, they have, but they're still looking for kids that can express themselves on paper. Somehow your value has to come across to me on paper. And that's really, really hard because as a teacher, as an educator, the kids sitting in front of you, some of those kids are just downright impressive and would make any campus or community or endeavor a better place by their character and their curiosity, but they don't come across great on paper. you know.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I find myself often talking about, which is how our systems have evolved in a way that values what we measure easily, right? And I think that we, in our mindset, adjust to the system or to the institution. I think we lose track of that. That like were this whole process of putting kids down on a piece of paper, um, filters out all the other things that we want. And like what I tell my students that, you know, that I don't think suburban communities do as well teaching is confrontation, like embracing confrontation, giving and receiving critical feedback, being comfortable in front of an audience. Those were things that I felt like were things I learned more in my Oakland and San Francisco teaching experiences than I did in Pleasanton and as a student in Hopkinton.
Yeah, and I think maybe retracting some of the stuff I just said, there has to be a balance. I don't want to, I guess if you had to categorize me, I'm an old school person, but I definitely don't like our grading model and things like that. But there has to be an element where the pendulum can't swing one way or the other. There still has to be an element of accountability. And not only accountability of behavior, where you're compliant or you're not, you don't speak out. There has to be an element of there's a task to be done, and life's going to present you various tasks that sometimes you just got to do. Half of life is showing up. Sometimes you got to show up and you got to perform. And there is some value to knowing you have a test, and there is an element of preparation that goes into it. And at least you can show me that you've put in the requisite amount of time to give me that. I see there's some value in that, right? Not as much as we put on it, there, because we put value on that to the exclusion of the growth. And seeking out the things that you're passionate about. Because no matter who you're talking about, people are going to be more able, willing, and excited about completing a task if they're completing a task in an area of interest, in something they're passionate about. You could have the person that seems like the laziest person in the world, walks down the hall to another teacher in another discipline, and they're world beaters because they don't care about fractals or whatever that thing was you said.
Right? Fractals.
Fractals.
And scale independence. Well, yeah, I mean, I felt like my curriculum was out of touch when I was in high school, but I also felt like you said, you learn from your positive and your negative experiences. And I had some teachers that were really, really knew me and really were inspiring. And I also felt like at times my teacher didn't know me and I wasn't that invested in their class. That's where I think education could improve. Like, I think if we're really going to, our content's going to kind of stay the same or not move at the pace that the world is, at least we could be emphasizing the psychology, the curiosity, the learning for the sake of learning part, learning about yourself a little bit better than we're doing now.
Yeah, as long as we have teachers removing their opinions and their biases from it, to get them to think and understand that what they bring in from home is important. And even if it's not important, it's not our business. I just think that we got to get them to explore, but not lead them as much as we do as to what to explore. I think there's so much. You're paid to teach math. I'm paid to teach politics and government. Obviously, it's more than that. We're paid to create an environment. I think we're expected to create an environment where their social and emotional well-being is taken care of, where they're comfortable, where they feel safe, and all those things. But there's a slow creep towards parenting that I find dangerous. And that's another massive issue in education when the building, when the system is so much an echo chamber, it doesn't seem, and it probably seems less so to you than it does to me, when it's such an echo chamber, it doesn't seem as though you are preaching or leading, because it starts to be perceived as common sense. Like things that my colleagues see as common sense, I think of as ruinous to a productive society. Like I see them as horrible, and they see them as common. And that's a big disconnect, right? And we shouldn't be competing with the kids. So I think that's a big problem, huge problem.
Yeah, I was just looking at this quote here. It says, perhaps the most valuable result of all education is the ability to make yourself do the thing you have to do when it ought to be done, whether you like it or not. This is the first lesson to be learned. So that, like, I feel, like I love, I have great colleagues. They're great people and everything, but like that conflict you feel, I wonder about, like, it sometimes you can't interrupt everything you don't like, right? Like you have to decide which are, if you want to be, like if you want to, if you believe the status quo needs to be corrected or something, you have to decide which are the things that are you're willing to, which flows you'll go with and which ones you'll swim against, I guess. How do you pick those? Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I have a problem with choosing my battles. I make everything maybe a little bigger than it should be. That's an issue. Plus, you're catching me at a vulnerable time.
Oh yeah, well that's actually that gives me a good question. Did you want to follow up on that, or can I ask the?
No.
Okay. All right. I tried to save you because I could sense vulnerability. What I want to talk about is how you adapt this year. There's no better thing to talk about than this year gave me an opportunity to adapt my curriculum, right? Like we were throwing a curveball or a slider or some kind of pitch that we weren't expecting. And what adaptations did you make to the change in environment?
Yeah, it's definitely been a net loss. I don't think the only real adaptation or change that I think will be a positive is what you said. I never heard of Zoom before. Maybe this time last year I had never heard of it before. I think I'm not sure what the time frame was, but it wasn't more than a year that I heard of it. And now I think this is going to be a valuable tool, because I am realizing not only Zoom, I have this, I don't know, whatever you call it on my screen where I record myself. I've been doing a lot of content, recording 2 to 3 minute videos of my subject matter, where I can send that out to kids to supplement what we're doing in class. Because the time in class is so valuable, I either have to push stuff down their throats, or if I'm going to stay more human in class, I have to get them that material somehow. So that was some of the adaptability, to stay after school, put a sign on my door to, don't interrupt, recording session in progress. And I teach little mini lessons and I send them out to the kids. So that's been a little, adaptation. But just being back in rows, yours is a little different because you're remote, but we sit in rows again. I mean, it took me a long time to get comfortable getting out of rows and being more of a, a communal space where they're looking at each other and facing each other. So now that's kind of sent us back. Um, and not seeing their faces has been really tough. But I think for me, the biggest adaptation is using technology as an advantage and not a burden, because it's always been a burden for me because I've never been good at it. But I'm seeing great advantages, and I'm thinking if and when this all goes away, I'm still going to use Zoom. I don't have to. If a kid has football practice at 2:30 and can't attend my extra help session, I could do an extra help session at 7 o'clock at night on Zoom with a group of kids, and that's kind of exciting down the road.
I think about that a lot too, and I want to share something that excites me too. And maybe this whole topic relates into something we can finish on, which is how did your softball coaching experience inform your baseball coaching experience ever since then? But I do often think about what it's going to look like, what education is going to look like after we go back to the same environment that we were in with the new tools that we've been experimenting with. I spent a lot of time as a math teacher with some of my classes just thinking about, like, how do I get the kids that are confused to ask a question? And like, I think that's a very basic skill that we don't emphasize enough. And going in that, a lot that goes into that is a content that's confusing, also one that's closed-ended where there's a right and wrong answer. I think there's part of it that sometimes teachers, if they feel like they're caught off guard, they might not make the students feel safe when they ask that question. And then I think a lot of times students know when they're confused, but they don't know what their question is. And I tell them this, like, that moment when you go from being confused to articulating a question is when most of the learning happens. So what I've thought of that's been helpful is I make the videos like you too. Like I think a lot about, am I wasting their time or am I making their time efficient? And so recording my lessons on YouTube has been a one thing that I've done. But then I've also just recently, just this past week, realized that I can embed that in another thing that gives them a place to ask questions where they're typing it. And then like I have this conversation with them, like that, this is the most important thing, is you ask the questions. And I'm getting questions that I never saw before. I'm getting questions that get to the root of their confusion that they're comfortable asking. And then I can make another video that responds to them. And so that's part of there is part of me that is hopeful, is excited, does see a future in education that will respond from this experience and be better at meeting our students' needs. I'm done rambling now. Can you answer the question I asked you before I started rambling, which is, after your softball coaching experience, how did you as a baseball coach change from that?
I don't know how I changed. It opened my eyes. It opened my eyes to some of the distinctions between coaching a group of young women and coaching a group of young men. They were definitely different. They were, and probably just that dynamic. I was much more, I had told the team early on that I'm not going to coach you as a girls team. I'm just going to coach you the way I coach, because you're just as talented, you're just as dedicated, you're just as eager to get better. So I'm not going to coach you differently, even though I don't know the sport as well. So that's going to be that was a big learning experience, that coaching was coaching, because I didn't know the sport as well, and I found just as much success. So I think you realize it's not as much about your expertise and your X's and O's as it is a bunch of willing people pulling in the same direction. But I tried not to consciously, I tried to not be as domineering with the girls. And it made me be a little bit more attentive to my language. We're just growing up in an environment where you talked to a young lady differently than you talk to a young man, right? That was just part of it. And I realized equality is not, I'm going to talk to you as rudely as I talk to them. My adaptation was I'm going to talk to them less rudely. You know, I'm going to talk to them the way I talk to you, because the way I talk to you is better, right? It's my upbringing taught me to speak to you more respectfully. So I think I have a more respectful tone with my guys teams now. So I guess that was a change. You know, and a personal change. I mean, it's, again, I'm a product of the middle of Title IX, and female sports were way different when I was in high school. Like our athletes, our female athletes in Hopkinton are extraordinary. It wasn't the case when I was in high school. There were fewer and far between good athletes. So it really opened my eyes to how competitive and how invested these girls were. You know, it wasn't an activity for them that they did because of equity, right? It was passion. They were passionate about it, and I could drive them just as hard and work them just as hard, if not harder. And I'm probably generalizing, but they're way smarter than my boys. I think that's just an indictment of some of the boys I've had, but they picked up concepts really quickly. So it was great. I have no negatives at all from that experience of those 5 years. It changed me as a teacher and a coach, and it was really, really fun.
And I kind of had this idea as we go through these, we'll also move through your career, but results wise, how did those softball teams do over those 5 years? Did you become better at the softball coaching itself, or I don't know anything about those 5 years.
Yeah, we did great. We should have won. We won the South Sectional title. We were. Let me see. I have a bat here. Let me see. Well, if they put. Yeah, we won the league twice. We won the South Sectional title, but I thought they would have the record on there. We were really, really good. We were really good. So in terms of, I coached it more like baseball, which when I do clinics now for softball coaches and stuff, I suggest to them that they use more baseball principles. I think there was a movement among a lot of softball coaches to do things a certain way just because baseball did it the other way. And because baseball was a little ahead of the curve in terms of development, for obvious reasons, right? So I think they took a unique path just to not be like baseball. And in some of those ways, they became more innovative, more aggressive. In some ways, they just did things that are silly, just silly. Like, in many ways, I was really happy because the other coaches were doing just silly things, because it was stuff that you just did in softball, you know. And I'd say, well, that was good. You do that. It's just really dumb. So it was good. It was challenging. It was fun. The best thing about it was the games are a lot shorter, so I was always home in time for dinner.
That is a good thing.
Big on dinner.
All right. Well, I don't want to keep you late on whatever meal is next on the East Coast, lunch, I assume. Do you have any final thoughts or closing words? Oh, can I read one thing on the last page of this thing that I've been going through? 100 years from now, it will not matter what my bank account was, the sort of house I lived in, or the car I drove, but the world may be different because I was important in the life of a child. It seems impactful.
Yeah, it is impactful. That's you know, and that it's again, there's a zillion of those quotes and cliches and stuff, but if you know, kind of unpack them and make them into more than just a quote, they're pretty powerful, you know. And I'm sure you're already experiencing it, but it seems to happen at least once a year where I hear from someone that I, in my mind, had no relationship with at all, or very little relationship. And I said something hopefully positive that impacted them, that they latched onto. You know, and it's just that concept of kids are always watching you. And the better the job you do, the curse of that is the more they watch you, right? The harder you work, the more they think you care, the more invested you are in their lives, the more important your words are. So the more careful you need to be, right? You know, I'm sure your kids are developing a tremendous amount of respect for you. That means your words cannot be taken lightly, because you're changing lives sometimes, which is really scary, unknowingly, you know. And that's an important thing. So,
Yeah, I do think about that, but
yeah.
probably, but try not to think about it too much, I think, because, or for me, I
Yeah.
some of those things are good to contemplate, and some of those, how I'm changing kids' lives in ways that I don't know, are part of the things I can't control also.
Yeah, and they make you like me, cuckoo.
That's what I'm trying to avoid. All right, I think we're done here. All right, welcome back. As you might have noticed, I try to make some kind of awkward or uncomfortable joke before we get started to put me in my comfort zone. But this week, I kind of have a question, because last week I sort of imitated you. And it was sort of because I have this thing where, like, you were a mentor of mine. And so, like, even though you were an empowering person in my life, like, you have an intimidating presence. And that still exists for me sometimes, like, as an adult. So part of me imitating you was like trying to get past that, like, imitating, like, the kind of like intimidating presence you have in my mind. I wonder, did you ever, with your high school baseball coach, like, did you find him as intimidating as an adult, or did you ever kind of go through anything like that? Or
Yes, still intimidating. But he was a big, intimidating guy. I'm like a fuzzy, warm, you know, jovial. Yeah, we joke about that with my assistant coaches, because they always say that kids get intimidated. I'm like, I don't see it, because I don't yell, I don't scream, and I'm unbelievably funny.
case in point right there.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't get it. I think whenever you make up the lineup, you're intimidating, or you have grades. You do grades. So, but I don't know. I have a different personality than my coach did, but he was definitely intimidating.
Well, I feel like we could go on for that, but I'm going to put that clip at the end.
All right.
It's,
You're the host.